So, take a really slow breath with me for a second. If you've been carrying around this heavy, just silent weight of exhaustion lately, wondering why family life feels so incredibly hard to hold together, I want you to know you are not alone, not even a little bit. In fact, that exact feeling of inadequacy, it's practically a defining psychological reality of our era. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are going to completely dismantle a ghost that has been haunting your home for way too long.
I mean, why does it feel like you're running a marathon that literally has no finish line just to keep the basic everyday structure of your family intact, right? I want to completely validate that heavy burden for you right now. Your exhaustion is so real, but the reasons behind it, they are totally misunderstood by almost everyone. To figure out why we actually feel this way, we're going to look through the really profound sociological lens of Zygmunt Bauman, specifically his concept of liquid modernity, and we're going to combine that with some brilliant insights from sociologist Ulrich Beck. Basically, we're going to deconstruct the illusions that are causing you so much unnecessary pain.
Okay, I want you to picture something with me. Imagine someone standing by a rushing river. They reach down and they're desperately trying to scoop up the water and just hold it perfectly still in their bare hands. But of course the water just slips right through their fingers. It spills out no matter how tightly they clench their fists, right? Well, this is exactly what we're doing when we chase the illusion of the perfect family today. We are literally trying to hold something that is inherently fluid in a rigid, unmoving shape. Society has absolutely sold us this picture-perfect, static ideal of domestic life, but the structural container that used to actually hold that ideal together, it has completely vanished.
There's this absolutely profound insight from Bauman that hits the nail on the head. He says, shaping fluids is easier than keeping them in shape. And wow, right? Let that sink in. In a liquid world, sure, you can momentarily push things together, but they are not going to stay there on their own. He explains that in our current era, keeping modern relationships intact requires absolute, constant vigilance. I'm talking perpetual effort. Nothing rests anymore. Nothing is cast once and for all. Just think about your own life for a second. Your partnerships, your parenting, your family connections, none of them run on autopilot, do they? They require this daily negotiation, constant communication, and agonizing effort just to maintain their form. And that perpetual effort is exactly why you feel so perpetually drained.
To really wrap our heads around this, we kind of have to contrast the world we actually live in right now versus the world we're still constantly judging ourselves against. In the past, what Bauman calls solid modernity, society was heavy. It provided these incredibly rigid blueprints. Roles were fixed. They were just given to us by tradition or your estate or your class. Now, were these structures coercively constraining? Yes, absolutely. They trapped people, but they also held people securely in place without requiring daily, exhausting emotional labor to maintain them. But today, we live in liquid modernity. All those heavy social bonds have been totally melted down. We are free, which is great, but patterns are now highly malleable. The solid ground has been liquefied, and it leaves us completely exposed. We're now forced to weave our own fluid arrangements with continuous, exhausting vigilance.
And this brings us to what I think is a deeply empathetic realization. Ulrich Beck introduced a concept that just perfectly captures our modern agony. He calls them zombie categories. Okay, so what are they? They are social structures and institutions that are, for all intents and purposes, dead. The solid societal blueprints that used to make them function have completely melted away, yet they are kept alive as these empty labels, basically haunting our modern expectations. We still use the words, we still feel all that immense cultural pressure, but the actual structural support, it's just gone. And the traditional family is one of these ghosts. It is literally a zombie wandering through our lives, demanding our absolute obedience to a standard that is no longer structurally possible to achieve.
I kind of just want to let this realization breathe in silence for a moment. Beck says zombie institutions are dead and still alive. The family, for instance. Think about the sheer crushing weight of that realization. The labels of family, husband, wife, parent, and child, they still absolutely exist in our vocabulary. But the solid, pre-given, completely unquestioned blueprints that once told us exactly how to perform those roles, poof, vanished. We are left holding onto the label, but we are forced to invent the actual contents from scratch, every single day, with literally zero universal instruction manual.
So because we are building without a manual now, we're experiencing this deep, massive fracture of modern roles. The family has transformed from this heavy, immovable foundation into a highly malleable, really brittle arrangement. Honestly, it's like we are all isolated figures standing in the dark, desperately trying to weave these fragile little threads together just to connect with one another. Because when the societal mold was broken to set us free, it wasn't replaced with a new one. Instead, those liquidizing powers moved from the macro level of society, right down to the micro level of our individual lives. We are all individually fully responsible for holding the threads together now.
Let's look at a really tangible example of how precarious this thread weaving gets, especially during something like a modern divorce. When a marriage breaks into cohabitation or just ends in divorce, the very core of family life, parenthood, begins to disintegrate into individual choices. Suddenly, adult children have the power to make these completely unilateral decisions about who even gets access to their new family unit. Grandmothers and grandfathers can be entirely included or completely excluded from their grandchildren's lives, often without any structural voice or rights in the matter whatsoever. And the grandchild? Well, they're left totally alone to construct what the word grandparent even means through their own personal life policies. The roles are no longer guaranteed by society. They are terrifyingly fragile, individual negotiations.
And what all of this reveals is a massive, silent trap. We have essentially reclassified the family as an individual task. Society has completely abandoned us to figure out these monumental relationship structures entirely on our own. So when a relationship falters, or when a family dynamic turns toxic, or when the sheer overwhelming logistics of caregiving become literally impossible, we don't look at the melted societal structures, do we? No, we look in the mirror. We view our inability to sustain the perfect family as a personal failure. We think it's a lack of willpower or some kind of psychological defect. But the truth? The system has retreated, and it's left you entirely holding the bag.
Honestly, if there is just one single thing you take away from this entire explainer today, please let it be this climax of understanding. Ulrich Beck writes, "How one lives becomes a biographical solution to systemic contradictions." I really want you to let those words sink in deeply. The domestic mismatches, the endless arguments, the deep-seated exhaustion you suffer from in your family life, these are, by and large, systemic failures. The solid structures of support have been melted away by liquid modernity. Yet society deliberately masks this massive systemic failure as your own personal problem. You are basically being asked to solve massive historical shifts in human civilization through your own private biographical life choices. And frankly, it is an impossible request.
So let's break down exactly why this burden is literally impossible and why we seriously need to relieve you of that guilt right now. First off, patterns and configurations are no longer pre-given. You literally have to invent your family dynamics from the ground up. Second, because of this, the family is now entirely your individual task. Third, this places an unbearable daily burden of pattern weaving right onto your shoulders. You're constantly, endlessly trying to keep the fluid in shape. And finally, the absolute cruelest part of liquid modernity, when the fluid inevitably slips through your fingers, the blame falls entirely on you. But I am here to tell you, based on the absolute deepest sociological realities of our time, that your feelings of failure are just the natural result of being forced to find personal solutions to massive, global societal shifts.
It is time to let go of the guilt. It really is. It's time to realize that the modern family, it just doesn't naturally anchor us the way it did back in that era of heavy, solid modernity. It simply cannot. The conditions of our world have fundamentally changed. You are not failing at family, you are surviving a major historical transition. By recognizing that the perfect, solid family is a zombie category, you can finally free yourself from its haunting demands. You can stop exhausting yourself trying to conform to a ghost.
I really want to pause right here so you can fully internalize this next sentence. It is not your fault. The heavy, perfect family is an illusion. It's a shifting shadow. And as that shadow finally retreats, it reveals a path that is, admittedly uncertain, but it's real. You no longer have to measure your messy, fluid, beautifully complicated life against some rigid statue that doesn't even exist anymore.
So, here we are at the threshold. The solid molds, they've been completely broken. The societal blueprints have melted away. The heavy burden of the perfect family has finally been exposed as a phantom. Now that you know the perfect family is an illusion, how will you choose to live? How will you begin to weave your own reality, stitch by fragile stitch, focusing on the genuine human bonds right in front of you, entirely free from the burden of guilt? It's time to stop chasing the ghosts and start living in the fluid, beautifully imperfect reality of today.